Wyoming Territory, June 1877. The day the storm broke over the plains, they called her too broken to wed. The wind howled through the cottonwoods along the North Platte River as Ada Harlow stood beside the half-collapsed fence of her family's ranch, her skirts soaked from rain. She did not flinch when the thunder cracked overhead. She had already endured worse storms. Her father had died 3 winters ago, her mother the year after, and the man she was meant to marry, Nathaniel, had never returned from the war, leaving only a folded letter and a name etched into a memorial stone in Cheyenne. Since then, whispers followed her wherever she went. Touched in the head, some said. Too much grief. Others were crueler. She talks to ghosts. She watches the wind like it is speaking to her. But Ada did not hear ghosts. She just remembered too much. And she did not watch the wind. She watched for someone who never came back. Now 26, she kept the ranch going alone. The fields were dry. The horses were thinning. And the townsfolk in Laramie had stopped pretending she was ever going to marry. They said she was too broken to wed. She was mending the fence when she saw the rider come through the trees. He moved slow, his horse walking careful. The man in the saddle leaned heavy to one side, and when he dismounted, she saw the reason. He held a cane in his right hand, carved from a dark, polished wood. He limped, but moved with purpose. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was rough, but not unkind. "I am looking for work. I heard you needed help." Ada stared at him. He was tall, though he carried himself like a man used to pain. His coat was patched at the shoulder. There was a deep scar on his jaw, a burn maybe, and his eyes green, sharp, but tired. "I did not put out word for a ranch hand," she said. "You did not have to," he answered. "The fence told me." She blinked. "Name's Elias Lorne," he added. "I can fix things. Been riding west, trying to find a place to stop." She hesitated. "You limp." He nodded. "Since Cold Harbor. Leg never healed right." "You are a veteran." "Yes, ma'am." Something in her chest pulled tight. "I do not have money to pay you." "I do not need money. Just a roof and a meal. I am not looking for charity. Just a place to be useful." She looked past him at the broken fence, then at the sky. Another storm was coming. "Fine," she said. "The barn is dry. You can sleep there." He gave a small nod. "Thank you." That night, Ada watched him through the kitchen window as he moved slow but steady, feeding the horses, checking the beams. He took his time, and he did not complain. The next morning, she found the fence mended. 3 days passed. Elias worked quiet. He only spoke when she did, but always answered honest. He fixed the porch step. He got the water pump working again. He even repaired the broken spinning wheel her mother had left behind. By the 5th day, she brought him a plate of food without him asking. He thanked her, but did not look surprised. "You were not afraid to come here?" she asked as he sat on the porch, cane across his lap. "Why would I be? People say I am not right." He looked at her then. "People say a lot of things. You do not believe them?" He shook his head. "I have met broken people. You are not one of them." She sat down beside him, uncertain why her throat felt tight. "Why are you really here?" she asked. Elias tapped his cane once, thoughtful. "Because I lost everything east of here, and I figured if all I had left was pain, I might as well use it to build something." She watched the way he looked out over the land. Not judging, not pitying, just seeing. "You built a life here," he said. "That is not broken. That is strength." Her eyes burned. She stood quickly and went inside. That night, she could not sleep. She remembered his words. The way he said them, like he had carried his own losses so long, he knew the weight of hers. In the morning, she found him at the corral, one hand resting on the fence rail. He turned when he heard her. "I want to show you something," she said. He followed her to the cottonwoods, where the river curved and the grass grew thick. She led him to a stone, half hidden under wildflowers. "Nathaniel," Elias read aloud. "Your fiancé?" She nodded. "He never came back. I waited 4 years." Elias knelt, touched the stone with his hand. "He was lucky," he said softly. She frowned. "Lucky? To be loved like that?" She swallowed hard. The wind moved through the trees again, but this time, it did not sound like ghosts. They walked back in silence. At the porch, he paused. "I know what it is to lose a future," he said. "But I also know grief does not mean you stop living. It just means you carry more." She looked at him. Really looked. "I thought I was the only one," she whispered. "You are not," he said. "I am broken too. Something inside her cracked open. She reached out and touched his hand. He did not flinch, and for the first time in years, she felt something warm at the edges of her chest. Not grief, not fear. Hope. They stood there, quiet and close, as the sun broke through the clouds, and neither of them pulled away. Elias rose before the light bled fully over the horizon, the barn still cool with night air. He moved slow but steady, his cane muted against the packed dirt. Outside, the sky was pale and wide, the color of unwashed linen, and the land stretched quiet beneath it. He found Ada already at the chicken coop, her sleeves rolled, straw in her hair. She glanced up when he approached, but her hands didn't slow in their work. "I let them out too late yesterday," she said. Hen pecked her own eggs. Elias crouched beside her, not speaking until she finished laying feed. "You sleep at all?" he asked. "Some." She wiped her palms on her skirt, straightened. Her eyes flicked toward the north pasture. "The south fence'll hold," he said, following her gaze. "That's not the one I'm worried about." She said nothing more, just walked toward the house. He followed, giving her space. At the table, she poured coffee into 2 tin mugs, one for each of them. He noticed she'd mended the handle on his since yesterday. He didn't mention it. "Instead," he asked, "you ever think of selling?" "Only when I'm too tired to think." He nodded. "But you won't," he said. "No," she said. "I won't." They drank in silence. A breeze passed through the open window, carrying the scent of wet hay and cottonwood bark. Elias set his mug down. "I noticed a wagon axle under the lean-to. Looks salvageable. It belonged to my father's freight cart. If I cut it down, I could use it for a hauling sled. You've got deadwood piling up near the creek." She looked at him then, brows lifting slightly. "You always work this hard for a roof and a meal?" "I'm not working for that." She leaned back, arms folded. "Then what are you working for?" He didn't answer right away. "There was a time I gave orders. Had men who followed them without pause. After the war, nobody followed me. Not even myself." Ada's expression didn't soften, but something in her shoulders eased. "I don't need someone to follow me," she said. "Good," he said. "I'm not here to lead." Afternoon brought clouds again, thick and yellow-edged. Ada kept to the paddock, brushing down the mare she'd raised from a foal. Elias worked near the woodshed, stripping bark from a downed cottonwood. Supper was quiet save for the clink of forks and the pop of a knot in the stove fire. When she cleared the plates, he stayed seated, watching the way she moved around the kitchen, neither hurried nor idle. "Did you always live here?" he asked. "My family moved west when I was 9. Father worked cattle, Mother kept a garden that never grew right." "And you?" "I followed orders." Elias let the silence stretch. "You were an officer?" "Cavalry captain." "Not that it mattered once the bullets came. What brought you this far west?" "The fact that nothing behind me was worth turning back for." Ada wiped her hands on a cloth, then turned to face him. "You still looking to build something?" He met her eyes. "If there's lumber and time." "There's always time," she said. "If we're not dead." That night, thunder stayed distant. The sky threatened but never broke. Ada stood on the porch, arms crossed against the wind, watching the tree line. She didn't turn when Elias stepped beside her. "You afraid of storms?" he asked. "Only the ones that come quiet." He nodded. "Those are the ones that take their time." The wind shifted, cooler now, and he turned toward her. "I wasn't lying. About being broken. I know, but I'm not useless." She looked at him then, steady and long. "Neither am I." They didn't touch. They didn't speak again, but they stood that way until the moon rose, pale and thin behind the clouds, and neither of them went back inside first. The first frost came early that year, dusting the sagebrush in silver and biting through the thin cracks in the cabin walls. Elias had taken to rising before Ada now, coaxing the stove to life before the chill could settle too deep into the floorboards. He never needed to be asked. The rhythm of their days had settled into something that neither of them named, but both moved within. That morning, Ada found him out behind the barn, sleeves rolled past his elbows as he planed the last of the salvaged wagon wood. His movements were slow but certain, each pass of the blade smooth, measured. She watched for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking about selling the saddle stock." He looked up, wiped the edge of his hand across his brow. "You sure? They're too much to keep fed through winter. The hay won't stretch past December." Elias nodded once. "I can haul them to the Mason spread." He's got buyers coming down from Rollins next week. She stepped closer, pulling her shawl tighter across her shoulders. You do that. You've done more for less. She studied his face, the quiet steadiness in it. I don't want you to feel you owe me. I don't, he said. I just don't like seeing good things fall apart for lack of help. Ada looked past him to where the horses stood huddled near the southern fence. The wind tugged their manes, but they stood still, heads low. I'll keep the mare, she said. The rest can go. Elias didn't argue. He simply went back to his work, and she stayed a while longer, leaning against the post, saying nothing. Later that day, she found him in the loft, sorting through old harness leather. She climbed the ladder without asking, sat across from him on the floorboards, knees drawn up. I never told you what happened the day he didn't come back, she said. Elias didn't look up, just let the silence wait. I got a letter from his captain. Said Nathaniel had taken a round in the side at Cedar Creek. They buried him near the Shenandoah. I never saw the grave. Just the dirt my father put a stone over. Elias set the strap down. That stone's not where he is, but it's where you are. That counts. She looked down at her hands. I didn't cry. Not then. I just started digging fence posts. Sometimes work's the only thing that doesn't lie. She reached for a scrap of leather and began folding it in her palms without purpose. I stopped singing after that. My mother said I had a voice worth something, but it felt wrong after. Elias eased his back against a beam. I haven't touched a saddle horn since the day I left the field. First time I tried, I saw the mud and the blood again. So I walked. She turned her face slightly. Even with the cane? He gave a small breath that might have been a laugh. Especially with the cane. Keeps folks from asking too many questions. She looked at him, her voice low. I never thought I'd hear myself sing again. He didn't answer, but his gaze stayed on her steady, waiting, without judgment. She felt the weight of it settle into something that didn't press. That night, she lit a single lantern in the parlor and pulled the old dulcimer case from beneath the bed. The strings were out of tune, one missing, but the wood still held its shape. She sat by the fire, the instrument across her lap, and struck a cautious chord. Elias didn't speak from the doorway. He just leaned on the frame, arms crossed, eyes soft. I don't remember all the words, she warned. Don't need to, he said. Just hum. So she did. Quiet at first, the sound uncertain. But the longer she played, the more the years fell away. Her voice rose thin, yes, but whole, and she didn't falter. When she finished, Elias stepped further into the room, the lamplight catching the worn lines of his face. You've still got it, he said. She looked down at the dulcimer. I thought it was gone. It wasn't, he said. Just waiting. They didn't move toward each other, not yet. But in the hush between them, something settled. No promises, no grand declarations. Just the quiet understanding of two lives that had been scraped raw and still found room to hold a gentler thing. Outside, the frost deepened. But inside, the fire burned steady, and neither of them reached for the past. They stayed in the now, where the music still echoed, and the warmth between them began to take root. The wind shifted eastward by late October, carrying the dry scent of snow and the distant calls of geese making their way south. Elias spent the days gathering what lumber he could from the lower grove, hitching the mare to the sled he'd fashioned from the wagon axle. Ada didn't ask how his leg held up, just brought him salve each evening, and laid it on the table without fuss. That afternoon, she stood by the root cellar, the hem of her skirt dusted with flour from the morning's baking. Elias approached with a load of kindling bundled under his good arm. I found the old forge behind the smokehouse, he said. It's rusted through, but the bellows still work. Ada tucked a wisp of hair behind her ear. My father built that. He shod the horses himself, wouldn't pay town prices. I could patch it. Might be we can make our own fittings, hinges, tools. She gave a small nod, then looked down at her hands. You always think ahead. He set the kindling down. I've spent enough years reacting. Thinking ahead feels like something new. Her gaze lifted, catching his. You ever think ahead to leaving? Elias rested his hand on the fence rail. I did. When I first came. Thought I'd stay long enough to matter, then keep moving. And now I think about what stays. Ada didn't answer. She turned toward the cellar door, but her hand paused on the latch. I saw a brochure once, she said, voice low. Some rail company printing showed orchards in Oregon, said the soil was soft and the winters mild. Elias leaned his weight onto his cane. You thinking of going? I'm thinking I never let myself want anything like that. I just kept this place going because it was here, and I was the only one left. And now, I'm wondering if staying could be a choice, not just what's left over. Elias looked out toward the distant ridge where the last of the light was catching on the tall grass. You don't owe this land your life, Ada. I know that, but you've given it your grief. Maybe it can give you something back. He saw the shift in her, then not hesitation, but the slow turning of a thought that had waited too long to be spoken aloud. That night, she brought out a second quilt and laid it across the foot of the bed in the room she'd stopped calling her parents. She didn't explain, and he didn't ask. When the fire burned low, he stepped inside, boots quiet on the floorboards. She stood by the window, arms folded, watching the moon rise thin over the shed. You ever been in a house that felt like it belonged to you? She asked. Elias shook his head. I've been in houses. Never stayed long enough to find out. She turned to him. I want this one to belong to both of us. If you'll stay. He didn't move toward her, not right away. But his voice was steady when he said, I didn't come here looking for that, but I think I found it all the same. Ada crossed the room, her steps sure. When she laid her hand on his chest, just above the buttons of his shirt, he covered it with his own. You don't have to fix me, she said. I wouldn't know how, he replied, but I can stand beside you. Outside, frost formed on the windows, delicate and fleeting. But inside, the warmth held. And when she leaned into him, he didn't pull away. They stood like that until the fire burned low, and the only sound was the wind brushing past the eaves, not harsh now, but steady, like something settling in to stay. The first snow fell in the second week of November, light, dry, and gone by noon, but enough to mark the turning of the season. Ada stepped outside to find the air sharp and bright. The sky stretched clear above the ridgeline. She shielded her eyes and saw Elias hitching the mare to the new sled. The leather reins looped precisely through the iron rings he'd forged himself. She crossed the yard, her boots crunching over half-frozen mud. You planning to haul wood all the way to the south line today? Elias gave a nod, his breath white in the morning sun. Ground's hard. Easier to drag now than wait for deep snow. I'll come with you. He glanced toward her hands, bare and red at the knuckles. You'll want gloves. I'll get them. They didn't speak much on the trail. The sled creaked softly behind them as they moved through the trees. When they reached the clearing where last winter's storm had dropped a pine across the edge of the property, Elias handed her the hatchet. Top branches first, he said. She set to it without question. They worked in rhythm, not hurried, not idle. When the last of the limbs had been cleared, Elias leaned against the stump and pulled a small flask from his coat. Ada raised a brow. Apple cider, he said. Warmed it by the stove this morning. She took it, the heat welcome in her fingers. I never liked winter, she said, staring at the pale sky through the bare branches. Too many silences. I used to hate it too. She handed the flask back. Used to. Now it feels like a pause, not an ending. She took a step closer and leaned against the same stump, her shoulder brushing his. I've been thinking, she said, about what comes next. Elias turned toward her, his expression unreadable. I want to plant again. Not just the kitchen patch. I mean real planting. Rootstock, maybe berries. Something we can tend together. He nodded slowly. I'll build the trellises. You're assuming I meant with you. I am. She smiled, not with her mouth, but in the way her eyes warmed. Good. They didn't kiss, not then, but she reached for his hand, and he gave it freely. By December, the days shortened and the work turned inward. Elias repaired the hinges on the parlor doors, made shelves for the pantry, and built a cradle for the stray cat that had taken up residence in the hayloft. Ada stitched new curtains from old feed sacks and wrote a letter to her cousin in Missouri asking for clippings from her orchard. One evening, after a supper of boiled beans and salt pork, Elias took a small box from the drawer beneath the stairs and set it on the table between them. I traded a bridle buckle for this in Laramie, he said. Back in September. Ada opened the lid slowly. Inside lay a ring plain silver, the band narrow, the stone dark green. I know it's not much, Elias said. She picked it up, turned it in her fingers. It's enough. I never planned to belong to anywhere again, he said. But I do now. If you'll have me. Ada arose from her chair, moved around the table, and took his face in her hands. You're late, she whispered. I knew this was coming the day you fixed the spinning wheel. He laughed, a low sound that stayed close to his chest. She slipped the ring on her finger and sat down beside him. We'll marry in the spring, after the ground thaws. We could ask Grace to come from town, he said. She's kind. And she's never let gossip keep her from speaking her mind. She'd be honored to stand with us. That night, they shared the bed not as strangers in grief, but as people who had chosen each other beyond what was lost. By April, the thaw came slow but sure. The mare foaled a healthy colt with a white blaze across her brow. The orchard clippings arrived packed in straw and waxed cloth, and Elias built the frames with care. They were married beneath the cottonwoods, the same ones that had marked so many partings in Ada's life. But this time, they bore witness to a beginning. Grace officiated, her voice steady, her hands warm as they wrapped the ribbon around Ada's wrist. The townsfolk came, not all, but enough to fill the yard with laughter and music. No one spoke of ghosts or grief. They spoke of the harvest, of the new colt, of the couple who had made a home from ruin. That night, as the sun slid down behind the far hills and the first stars blinked into the sky, Ada and Elias stood at their porch. She leaned into him, her head against his shoulder. We built this, she said. We did. It's ours. It always was. And as spring unfolded around them, quiet and full of promise, they stayed side by side, two hearts once broken, now mended, not by forgetting, but by choosing to carry forward. Together. Always.